"I'll never marry a rude woman like you," said the Mafia boss, until he saw her silent concern. The rain in Greywood was a special kind of miserable. It wasn't the hard, cleansing downpour of New Harbor, the kind that washed the city's sins into the gutters by morning. This was a fine, persistent mist that clung to everything, turning the sky to brushed steel and the dead leaves to a soggy, brown pulp. It soaked through the wool of Lorenzo DeSantis's custom-tailored overcoat, a feat he would have thought impossible. He stood under a dying oak, hands clasped behind his back, watching the casket of a man he barely knew lower into the wet earth. Lorenzo hated small towns. They were full of damp, decay, and prying eyes. He was here for one reason: to be seen. Back in New Harbor, his organization was bleeding. An internal betrayal, deep and precise, had led to a leaked meeting location. 2 of his best men loyal to his father before him, were dead. The funeral in Greywood was for an old associate, a forgotten link in the chain, but the timing was a grim opportunity. His presence here, 200 miles from his urban throne, was a message. It said, "I am everywhere, I am watching, and I am not weak." The mourners huddled under a collection of black umbrellas, their faces pinched with a mundane, uncomplicated grief. Lorenzo felt nothing but the chill. His grief was a colder, sharper thing, a rage that had settled deep in his bones. When the miserable ceremony concluded, his driver, a large man named Sal, moved to open the door of the black sedan. "Wait here," Lorenzo murmured, his voice a low gravel. "Boss, it's wet. I need a moment to think. Stay with the car." He needed coffee. He needed something hot and bitter to cut through the damp. He saw a neon sign flickering across the town square, just past the church, the Copper Bell Diner. It looked as tired as the rest of the town. He pushed through the glass door, a small bell jangling pathetically overhead. The diner was a relic of the 1960s. All cracked vinyl booths and formica tables. It smelled of stale coffee and grilled grease. A handful of locals, still in their funeral blacks, were scattered around, speaking in low tones. Lorenzo sat in a booth by the window, ignoring the menu. He was used to service that anticipated his needs. Here, it was just another wet coat. A woman with a coffee pot appeared at his elbow. "What'll it be, hun?" He didn't look up. Coffee, black. The ceramic mug she slid in front of him was heavy and chipped at the rim. He watched her pour, his eyes tracking her hand. It was steady, but the knuckles were red and raw. "You from the funeral?" she asked, her voice flat, not friendly. He finally looked up. She was younger than her voice suggested, maybe late 20s. Her hair was a honey blonde, pulled back in a messy knot that had mostly escaped. Her uniform was a faded blue, the apron stained, but it was her eyes that held him. They were a deep, exhausted green, and they were looking at him with an impatience that bordered on hostility. "I am," he said. "Sorry for your loss, I guess." She started to turn away. "I need the check," Lorenzo said. He hadn't even touched the coffee. She stopped, turning back slowly. "I just poured it. I've changed my mind. The check." His tone was final. The one he used in boardrooms and warehouses. It was the tone that ended discussions. A flicker of something, annoyance, not fear, crossed her face. "You'll get it when I have a minute. I've got 3 other tables." Lorenzo felt a slow, unfamiliar heat rise in his chest. He was not a man who waited. He was the head of the DeSantis family. He could buy this diner and tear it down before she finished her shift. He placed a $50 bill on the table. More than enough for the coffee. "Keep it, I'm leaving." He moved to slide out of the booth, but her voice stopped him, sharp as a crack of ice. "Hey, city guy." He turned. She was standing with her hands on her hips, the coffee pot still clutched in one hand. "We don't do that here," she said, her voice low and carrying. The diner quieted. "Do what?" he asked, his own voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "That," she motioned to the money, "that flashing it around, I'm better than you. Snap your fingers entitlement. You're in a room full of people who just buried a friend. You didn't touch your coffee. You didn't say please. And now you're trying to throw money at me to shut me up. I don't care who you are. You wait your turn like everyone else." "Sal." who had defied orders and was waiting by the door, took a half step forward. Lorenzo lifted one hand, a short, sharp gesture, and Sal froze. Lorenzo studied the woman. Ava Monroe. According to her name tag, she was not intimidated. He could see the pulse jumping in her throat, the slight tremor in her hand, but her gaze was level. She was terrified, and she was doing it anyway. It was, he decided, incredibly irritating. "You have no idea who I am," he said softly. "I know exactly who you are," she retorted, her voice shaking just a little. "You're the guy in the $1,000 suit who thinks his time is more important than anyone else's. You're arrogant, you're entitled, and you're rude." Arrogant, entitled, rude. The words echoed in the silent diner. No one had used those words to him, not to his face, since his father died. He felt the rage, the cold grief from the cemetery, twist into something hot and personal. He stepped toward her, invading her space. He was a foot taller, 100 pounds heavier, and he let the full weight of his presence press down on her. He expected her to flinch, to step back. She didn't move. He leaned in, his voice a whisper for her alone. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ava Monroe." He saw the flicker in her eyes as he used her name, but she didn't break. "And you're a bully. Now get out of my diner." Lorenzo stared at her for 1, 2, 3 long seconds. The air crackled, then he straightened his coat, his face a mask of stone. He left the 50 on the table. "Keep it," he snarled. "You clearly need it more than I do." He turned and stormed out of the diner, Sal scrambling to open the door for him. As the bell jangled, he heard himself mutter it under his breath. A final, frustrated curse against the town and the woman. "I'd never marry a rude, insufferable woman like you." He got into the back of the sedan, the leather cool against his skin, and slammed the door. "Drive," he commanded. But as the car pulled away, his gaze was drawn back to the diner. He had been so focused on the confrontation. He had missed the periphery. Now, he saw. Earlier, while he was waiting for his coffee, a toddler in a booth near the kitchen had started to wail, a piercing, frantic sound. Lorenzo had winced in annoyance, but Ava, in the middle of a rush, had stopped. He watched her crouch down by the high chair. She didn't look annoyed. She leaned in, her entire demeanor shifting, and said something soft. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw her hand, the one that wasn't raw, gently fix the child's blanket. The baby had quieted, gurgling, and Ava had smiled, a real, luminous smile that transformed her tired face. And just now, as he was pulling away, he saw her burst back out of the diner door, the rain plastering her thin uniform to her skin. She wasn't chasing him. An old man, one of the mourners, was struggling at the curb, his cane slipping. Ava ran to him, shoved her own cheap, flowered umbrella, the only one by the door, into his hand, said something sharp but kind, and then ran back inside, shivering without a second glance. Lorenzo watched until the diner disappeared from view. The woman was a contradiction, a viper with a bleeding heart. It didn't make sense. It annoyed him, and he put it in his mind. He had real problems. The drive back to New Harbor was 3 hours of strained silence. When he returned to the DeSantis estate, a granite fortress overlooking the Atlantic, the dampness of Graywood felt 1,000 miles away. He spent the next 48 hours in his study with Nico, his right-hand man. Nico was a man of few words and absolute loyalty, a genius with numbers and data. "The leak was clean, boss," Nico said, his eyes on a bank of monitors. "No phone records, no electronic trace. Whoever set up the meeting for our men used old-school methods." "A ghost," Lorenzo said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Ghosts get sloppy. Find the money, Nico." They worked through the night. Lorenzo's mind was a steel trap, sifting through logistics, timelines, and loyalties. The betrayal cut deeper than the money. It was a failure of his control, a stain on his father's legacy. At dawn, Nico's fingers, which had been flying across the keyboard, paused. "What?" Lorenzo asked, not looking up from a spreadsheet. "The warehouse," Nico said, "the one in the meatpacking district where the meeting was supposed to be. A shell corporation leased it 2 months ago." "Standard," Lorenzo said. It is. But a holding company funded the payment for the lease, a real estate venture. I've been digging into its registry. Nico turned his screen. The company is registered to a single property. Lorenzo leaned in, his eyes narrowing. It's a small parcel of land, mostly undeveloped, Nico continued, just outside a town called Graywood. The name hit Lorenzo like a physical blow. Graywood, the damp, the funeral, the diner. It could be a coincidence. Boss, a dead end. Lorenzo stood up, the ice in his glass clinking. No, it's not. The old man we buried in his territory was supposed to be dead, but someone is using it. Someone is hiding in that miserable town, using it as a back door to my city, thinking I'd never look there. He thought of the diner, the prying eyes, the defiance. Sal, he called, his voice sharp. Get the car ready. We're going back to Graywood. What's the cover, boss? Nico asked. You said it yourself, Lorenzo said, putting on the same damp overcoat. Real estate. I'm a wealthy man from the city, looking to invest in the charming, rustic potential of their dying town. The second time he walked into the Copper Bell Diner, the bells jangling sounded like a challenge. It was evening, the dinner rush. The place was half full. Ava was there, moving like a blur between the tables in the kitchen. He saw her spot him. Her back stiffened, her shoulders rising. She slapped a menu down in front of a trucker and pointedly ignored him. Lorenzo took the same booth. This time, he didn't snap his fingers. He didn't demand service. He just sat, and he watched. He was on a hunt, and this was his observation post. He studied the locals, listening to the cadence of their speech, looking for a face that didn't belong. But his eyes kept being drawn back to her. She looked more tired than before. The dark circles under her eyes were stark. He watched her take an order from a family, her pencil flying. He saw her force a smile for a customer, a smile that didn't touch her eyes. He saw her rub the back of her neck in the brief moment she was hidden by the kitchen door. She was working with a quiet, desperate focus. There was no wasted motion. She was a machine of efficiency, fueled by something he couldn't name. Finally, after he had been sitting for 20 minutes, she marched to his table. Are you going to order, or are you just going to sit there and glower? She snapped, her order pad in hand. Coffee, black, he said quietly. She glared at him, then stalked off. When she returned, she slammed the mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim. Anything else? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. No, thank you. The thank you seemed to throw her off. She stared at him for a beat, then just shook her head and walked away. He sat for an hour, drinking the bitter coffee, observing. He felt different. His anger from the other day had cooled, replaced by the keen focus of his investigation. And through that lens, he saw her not as an annoyance, but as part of the town's fabric. The only part with any steel in it. Her shift ended at 9. He watched her untie her apron, run a hand through her hair, and grab a thin jacket from a hook. She didn't speak to anyone. She just walked out the back door. He waited 30 seconds, then followed. He kept his distance, sticking to the shadows. He was curious. Where did a woman with that much fire and that much exhaustion go to rest? She didn't walk toward the residential streets. She walked in the opposite direction, toward the older, poorer part of town. He followed her for 3 blocks, his footsteps silent on the damp pavement. She turned at a large, grim brick building, Graywood Community Hospital. It was a low-income facility, the kind of place people went to when they had no other options. He watched from across the street as she pushed through the heavy doors. He tailed her inside. The hospital smelled of bleach and sickness. He kept his head down, following the sound of her worn-out sneakers on the linoleum. She passed the main wards, heading down a long, quiet corridor to the extended care wing. She stopped at room 213. She paused, her hand on the door, and he saw her shoulders slump. She took a deep breath, composed herself, and pushed the door open. Lorenzo moved to the shadows of an alcove down the hall, where he could see through the small, wired glass window of her door. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a heart monitor. A woman was in the bed, still and pale, a tangle of tubes and wires connecting her to the beeps of the machines. She was a ghost, a shell. Ava moved to the bedside chair. She touched the woman's still hand. "Hey, Sarah," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm here." She sat, pulling a worn paperback book from her bag. She opened it to a dog-eared page, and she began to read. Her voice, the same one that had cut him to the quick in the diner, was transformed. It was a soft, gentle melody, full of warmth and inflection, painting a picture of a world far from this sterile room. Lorenzo stood in the hallway, frozen. He watched her read to the silent, comatose woman. He watched her stop, wipe her eyes, and then continue, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't define. He stayed for an hour, an unmovable shadow, until a nurse's approach forced him to retreat. He went back to his car, parked in the darkness across the street, and he waited. Just after midnight, Ava emerged. She walked out of the hospital, moving like she was carrying the weight of the building on her back. She made it to the edge of the parking lot, into the weak circle of a streetlight, and stopped. She leaned against the brick wall, her head tilted back. Her shoulders began to shake. He watched from the darkness of his car as Ava Monroe, the rude, insufferable woman from the diner, finally let herself break. She didn't make a sound. She just cried. Silent tears tracking paths down her face, wiping them away with an angry and impatient hand, as if the tears themselves were a betrayal. Lorenzo sat in the driver's seat, the engine cold. He had come here to find a man who had betrayed him. He had come here to reestablish his control. But as he watched the woman across the street pull herself together, straighten her spine, and start the long walk home, something else stirred inside him, a heavy, unfamiliar feeling that settled in his chest, dense and warm. It wasn't anger, it wasn't a pity, it was, he realized with a cold, distant shock, the first thing he had felt in a very long time. Lorenzo DeSantis did not tolerate mysteries in his world. Mysteries were loose threads, and loose threads could unravel an empire. That night, watching Ava Monroe cry her silent, angry tears, he had identified a new one. He did not return to New Harbor. He checked into Graywood's only passable motel under an assumed name, a simple Mr. Anthony, and turned the bland beige room into a command center. While he slept for a few hours, Nico, working remotely from the estate, had already begun to dig. The file Nico sent to his encrypted laptop was thin, but the story it told was heavy. Ava Monroe, age 28. Her sister, Sarah Monroe, is 32. 3 years ago, Sarah had been the victim of a brutal hit-and-run on a Graywood side street. The driver was never found. The impact left her with catastrophic brain trauma. She'd been in a coma at the community hospital ever since. Lorenzo stared at the screen. A hit-and-run. In a town this small. Never found meant something else. It meant someone was protected. He kept reading. Sarah had 2 daughters, Lily and Maya, ages 6 and 8. Their father was long gone. When Sarah was hospitalized, custody fell to Ava. Ava, who was then only 25, working part-time at the library, had suddenly become a single mother of 2 traumatized children and the sole caregiver for a comatose sister. The library job was swapped for the round-the-clock shifts at the diner. The file included a bleak summary of her finances. The hospital bills were astronomical. The debt was suffocating. She was, on paper, completely and totally ruined. Lorenzo closed the laptop. He thought of the raw knuckles, the exhausted eyes, the cheap, flowing umbrella. It wasn't arrogance he'd seen in the diner that first day. It was the last, ragged line of defense for someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. He felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. His investigation into the betrayal, the real reason he was in this town, suddenly felt tangled with this woman's private tragedy. He went back to the diner the next day. It was mid-afternoon, the quiet lull before the dinner rush. He took his usual booth. Ava was at the counter, her back to him, refilling salt shakers. He saw her shoulders tense. She knew he was there. She finished the shakers, one by one, her movements deliberate, drawing out the time. Finally, she turned, picked up a coffee pot, and marched over. "You again," she said. It wasn't a question. "Coffee," he said. His voice was softer this time. She poured it, her hand impressively steady. As she set the pot down, he slid a crisp, folded $100 bill across the table. "For your trouble," he said. Ava looked at the money. Then she looked at him, and her eyes, those tired green eyes, flashed with a sudden, brilliant fire. She laughed. It was a short, sharp, bitter sound. "My trouble?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "You think that's my problem? You think you can walk in here, in your suit that costs more than my rent, and buy a clear conscience for $1 or 100? It's a tip, nothing more," he said, his own patience thinning. "It's an insult, Maeso." She shot back. "Well." She picked up the bill between two fingers, as if it were contaminated. "You're a mob king trying to buy dignity, and you're doing it in the wrong place." The diner, though mostly empty, went silent. The cook in the back, a burly man named Gus, poked his head out of the window. "Mob king," Lorenzo repeated, the words hanging in the air. He felt the cold mask of his authority settle over his features. "You're still playing that dangerous game." "It's not a game," she said, her voice shaking with a fury that was almost palpable. "It's my life, and in my life, we don't take blood money." She crumpled the bill in her fist. "Here's your coffee. It's $2.50. Pay what you owe, or get out." Lorenzo stared at her. He could have her fired. He could buy this building and have it condemned by nightfall. He could destroy the fragile, precarious life she had built. Instead, he found himself pulling 2 singles and a pair of quarters from his pocket. He placed them on the table. "Keep the change," he said, his voice flat. He stood up, leaving the untouched coffee, and walked out. He was furious. Not at her. Not really. He was furious at the complication, at the stubborn, impossible pride of the woman. She was drowning, and she was refusing a life raft because she didn't like the man who was offering it. He spent the rest of the day coordinating with Nico. The real estate shell company was a dead end, but the money flowing into it was not. The trail was fractured, laundered through a dozen small-town businesses, but it was leading inexorably toward one of New Harbor's oldest families, the Calderones, Marco Calderone, his rival, a man whose ambition was matched only by his lack of subtlety. It made sense. Marco was just stupid enough to think he could poach Lorenzo's men and just cowardly enough to hide his operations 200 miles away. He was in his car, parked down the street from the diner, waiting for Ava's shift to end, when he saw the other man. It was dark, just past 9. Ava was walking out the back, pulling her thin jacket tight. A heavy-set man in a cheap suit stepped out of the alley, blocking her path. Lorenzo's hand went instantly to the inside of his coat, to the cold steel that rested there. He didn't move, just watched. The man was talking, his voice an aggressive rumble, too low to hear, but his body language was clear. He was jabbing his finger at her. Ava stood her ground, her arms crossed, but Lorenzo could see her tremble even from a distance. The man grabbed her arm. That was enough. Lorenzo was out of the car in an instant. He crossed the street in 3 long, silent strides. "Final notice. Lady, the agency's patience is gone." The man was snarling, shaking her arm. "I told you, I need more time," Ava pleaded, her voice strained. "Time's up." The man raised his other hand, not to hit her, but to gesture, to intimidate. Lorenzo's hand clamped down on the man's shoulder. It was like closing a steel vise. The man yelped, his grip on Ava vanishing as his knees buckled. "I believe the lady asked for more time." Lorenzo's voice was a soft, deadly purr. The man, a cheap debt collector, turned and froze. He saw the suit. He saw the car. And then he saw Lorenzo's eyes, and the blood drained from his face. He knew, instinctively, that he was not looking at a civilian. "This ain't your business," the man stammered, trying to regain his footing. "You put your hands on her," Lorenzo stated, his grip tightening. He could feel the man's collarbone grinding. "That makes it my business." He shoved the man backward, sending him stumbling against the brick wall. "You will not come near her again. You will not call her. You will not send her so much as a piece of mail. The debt, whatever it is forgotten." "I can't do that, Mr. My boss, Lorenzo stepped in, his face inches from the man's. Your boss works for someone. I want the name now. I don't know. Lorenzo smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. I think you do. He pressed the man against the wall, his forearm across his throat. And you will tell me, or I will break your arm, then your leg, and I will leave you here in the alley for the rats. The man's eyes bulged. Torres, he choked. Benny Torres, he runs a small-time crew out of Kingston. That's all I know, I swear. Lorenzo held him for a beat longer, then released him. The man collapsed, gasping. Get out of this town, and if I ever see your face again, I will finish what I started. The collector scrambled to his feet and fled, disappearing into the darkness. Lorenzo straightened his coat. He was breathing heavily, the adrenaline thrumming. He turned to Ava. She was pressed against the diner's back door, her face pale, her eyes wide. He had expected fear. He had expected, perhaps, a reluctant gratitude. He got neither. I didn't ask for your help, she said, her voice shaking but cold. Lorenzo stopped. He put his hands on you, and I would have handled it. I have handled it before. He was threatening you. Everyone threatens me, she burst out, her voice cracking. The bank threatens me. The hospital threatens me. The world threatens me. I don't need another bully in a more expensive suit to save me from a cheaper one. He was stunned. The frustration from earlier returned. Sharper this time, mixed with an infuriating intrigue. I was not being a bully. Ava, I was helping. No, she said, pushing herself off the wall. You were staking a claim. You were doing whatever it is you people do. I've seen it before. You help someone, and then they owe you. And I won't owe you. I won't owe anyone, especially not you. She pushed past him, her shoulder brushing his arm, and started walking down the dark street. Ava, he called. She stopped but didn't turn. It's not safe. It's never been safe, she said, and kept walking until she disappeared around the corner. Lorenzo stood in the alley, the smell of garbage and rain filling his lungs. He realized, completely and utterly baffled and frustrated and, if he was honest, deeply impressed. He got back in his car and made a call. Nico, I have a name. Benny Torres, out of Kingston. Find out who he works for. I want to know, by morning, how he connects to the Calderones. He hung up. He drove not to his motel, but to a small, all-night florist. He bought a single, perfect red rose. Then he drove to her apartment building, the one Nico had found, a run-down brick tenement on the poor side of town. He found her mailbox, the one with Monroe written on a fading piece of tape. He paused. He had a white envelope in his glove compartment, filled with $10,000 in cash. It was his problem solver fund. He took it out, along with the rose. He looked at the envelope, then at the building. He thought of her face, twisted in pride and fury, as she'd crumpled his $100 bill. I won't owe you. He was impressed, but he was also annoyed. He was Lorenzo DeSantis. He did not get no for an answer. He tucked the envelope and the rose into the slot. Let her pride fight that. The next morning, Nico's report was waiting. Benny Torres was, as suspected, a bottom feeder. But he was on the payroll of a subsidiary of Calderon Industries. They were using medical debt collection as a front, a way to launder small-time cash, and, Lorenzo suspected, to keep a low-profile presence in the town. This was no longer a theory. This was a direct incursion. That afternoon, Lorenzo, flanked by Sal and two other men, walked into a private dining room at a New Harbor steakhouse. Marco Calderon was already there, nursing a whiskey. Lorenzo, Marco smiled, his eyes cold. An unexpected pleasure. To what do I owe this aggressive lunch? Lorenzo sat down. He didn't order. You're getting sloppy. Marco. Graywood. Marco's smile twitched. It's a nice town. Good for retirement. Your man, Benny Torres, is a liability, Lorenzo said, his voice level. He's been harassing a local, a woman. Business is business. Marco shrugged. Sometimes people get in the way. This one, Lorenzo said, leaning forward, is not to be touched. Your operation in that town, whatever it is, just became 10 times more difficult because I am now watching. You watching a small town? Over a waitress? Marco laughed, but it was strained. Don't tell me the great Lorenzo DeSantis has a heart. I have a business, Lorenzo corrected, his voice like ice. And you are conducting yours in my territory, using the ghost of one of my father's associates as cover. It's an insult. This is your only warning. Pull your men out of Graywood, all of them, starting with Torres. Marco's face hardened. Or what? Or I will fold your entire operation, starting with your Kingston laundromat, before the week is out and you know I can... They stared at each other for a long, tense minute. Finally, Marco sighed, picking up his drink. She must be one hell of a waitress. She's a distraction you can no longer afford, Lorenzo said. He stood up. The warning is given. He returned to Graywood that evening. He was, for the first time in a long time, satisfied. He had drawn his line. He stopped by Ava's apartment. He couldn't help himself. He was curious if she'd taken the money. He checked the trash cans by the side of the building. There, on top of a pile of coffee grounds, was a single red rose. And next to it, a white envelope, torn into a dozen precise, angry pieces. Lorenzo stared at the shredded cash, $10,000. She'd torn it up. He felt a bark of laughter, a genuine, surprised sound rise in his chest. It was the most insane, idiotic, magnificent thing he had ever seen. His annoyance vanished, replaced by a pure, unadulterated respect. Fine, he muttered to himself, walking back to his car. We'll do it your way. He spent the next hour on the phone with his legal team, not as Lorenzo DeSantis, but as the head of a charitable foundation. By the time he was done, the Graywood Community Hospital was the recipient of a new, anonymous grant, specifically earmarked for long-term neurological care. The fund was large enough to cover Sarah Monroe's bills for the next 50 years. It was untraceable. It was ironclad. Ava would never know. She would simply be told her debt, the one crushing her, was gone. Wiped clean by a miracle. Her pride would remain intact. She would owe no one. A strange sense of calm settled over him. He had solved the problem, and he had, in a way, won their silent battle. He started going to the diner every day. He no longer felt the need to fix her, only to observe her. He sat in his booth, a quiet shadow, and watched her work. He saw the way her smile, when it was real, lit up her whole face. He saw her slip a free pastry to a homeless man. He saw her patience with the two nieces she sometimes brought in for dinner, her eyes soft as she helped them with their homework. He started to talk to her, not much, just a question here and there. Busy day? He asked one afternoon. She looked at him, surprised by the civil tone. They're all busy. You like the rain? He asked another, as a storm raged outside. She was wiping a table. She paused. I used to. Now it just means the roof might leak. He learned to read the subtle shifts in her exhaustion. He learned the names of her nieces. He learned she liked her coffee with one sugar, though she never drank it sitting down, and she, in turn, stopped treating him like an invader. He was still the man in the suit, but he was a quiet man now. He was just there. A fixture. One night, a week after the confrontation with the debt collector, the storm he'd asked about finally broke. It was a true deluge, the kind of rain that turned streets into rivers. Her shift ended. She stood by the diner door, staring out at the sheet of water. Her shoulders slumped. He knew she walked a mile and a half home. He pulled his sedan up to the curb, the engine a low hum. He rolled down the passenger window. You'll drown before you make it 2 blocks, he said. She turned, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights. She looked at him, at the warm, dry interior of the car, then back at the rain. I'll manage, she said, her voice small. Don't be stubborn. Ava, he said, his voice quiet. No hint of a command. It's just a ride. She hesitated. She looked at the rain, then at him. He was not the man who had stormed out of the diner. He was not the man who had thrown money at her. He was the man who had sat quietly in her section for a week, asking for nothing but coffee. She took a breath, pulled her jacket tight, and ran a few feet to the car. She opened the door and slid inside, dripping water onto the pristine leather. She sat there, staring forward, her hands clenched in her lap. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain on the roof. Lorenzo put the car in gear. Where to? The silence inside the sedan was thick, broken only by the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. Ava stared straight ahead, her hands twisted in her lap. She was hyper-aware of her damp jacket, of the smell of diner grease and wet wool fogging the windows, tainting the pristine, leather-scented air of his car. She was sitting in a vehicle that was likely worth more than her sister's lifetime of medical bills. Lorenzo drove, his large hands steady on the wheel. He passed the turnoff for the community hospital, its lights a grim blur in the rain. He saw her glance at it. "You're lucky," he said, his voice a quiet rumble, startling her. Ava turned, her expression a mix of confusion and indignation. "Lucky? You think I'm lucky?" "You can still sit with her," he said. "No." His gaze fixed on the road. "You can read to her. You still have time." Her breath hitched. "How did you know I read to her?" The question came out as a whisper. The fight in her momentarily extinguished. "I saw you the other night at the hospital." He didn't say he had followed her. He didn't need to. "I lost my sister to Eliana." Ava watched his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the way a muscle tightened. He was not the man from the diner. He was not the man from the alley. This was someone else. "It was 12 years ago," he continued, his voice flat, devoid of self-pity, a simple statement of a brutal fact. "It was a failed hit job, a car bomb. The bullet, the bomb, was meant for me. I had just taken over my father's operations. I was arrogant, I moved too fast, made an enemy I underestimated." He paused, and Ava could almost see the memory playing out in his dark eyes. "She borrowed my car. She was just going to the bakery to get bread for Sunday dinner. She was 23, and I was the one who was supposed to be in that car." Ava said nothing. There was nothing to say. She didn't offer condolences. She didn't murmur that she was sorry. She knew, better than anyone, how hollow those words were. She understood the shape of a grief that had no end, so she just nodded, a single sharp dip of her chin, and looked back at the road. He pulled up to her apartment building. The rain was now a biblical deluge, a solid sheet of water. A flash of lightning illuminated the street, followed an instant later by a crack of thunder so loud the car itself seemed to shake. Ava flinched. Lorenzo simply watched the storm, his face impassive. "You should wait it out," Ava said, her voice small. He looked at her. "I'll be fine." "No, you won't," she said, her practicality overriding her fear. "These streets flood. That underpass 3 blocks back? It'll be 10 feet underwater in 20 minutes. You'll ruin your car." It was the only reason she could think of that he might actually listen to. Just come inside. Wait for a break. He stared at the building, then at her. He had been inside her life for a week, but he had never breached this, her final fortress. He gave a single, curt nod. "All right." They ran from the car to the building's entrance, getting soaked in the few seconds it took. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. She fumbled with the key, her fingers cold. The apartment was small, and to his eyes, chaotic. But it wasn't dirty. It was lived in, aggressively. There were 2 pairs of small, muddy sneakers by the door, a stack of children's drawings on the fridge, and a smell of crayons and chicken soup. Toys were scattered across the living room floor, a minefield he carefully navigated. "I know it's a mess," she stammered, closing the door and locking the 3 deadbolts. "It's warm," he said, and it was the truth. His own estate was a silent, cold museum. This place, for all its poverty, felt vibrantly, messily alive, as if on cue. Another boom of thunder rattled the windows. This one was followed by a terrified scream from the back room. "Mommy! Mommy, the monster's back!" Ava's face went from pale to ashen. "Oh, God, Lily, Maya!" She bolted from the room, running down the short hallway. Lorenzo hesitated for only a second before following. He stood in the doorway of a small bedroom, painted a fading, cheerful pink. Two small beds were crammed against one wall. Ava was kneeling between them, trying to comfort two small, crying children. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," she was murmuring, her hands fluttering between them, trying to soothe both at once. "It's just thunder, just a loud noise." "It's the giant," the smaller one, Maya, wailed, sitting bolt upright. "He's gonna get us." The older one, Lily, was just crying silently into her pillow, her small body shaking. Maya suddenly saw him. Her wail hitched in her throat, her eyes widening in new terror. "Who's that?" "He's a friend, Maya," Ava said, her voice strained. "He's a friend. He's here because of the rain." Lorenzo looked at the scene. At Ava, overwhelmed, at the two terrified girls. He moved, his large frame seeming to suck all the air from the tiny room. Ava tensed, ready to shield them. He didn't go to Ava. He walked past her and sat on the edge of Maya's bed. The mattress groaned under his weight. Maya stared at him, her tear-streaked face a perfect mask of awe and fear. He looked at her, his expression as serious as if he were in a boardroom. "He's not a monster," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was, miraculously, deeper than the thunder. "He's just clumsy. The giant—" Maya sniffled, her thumb creeping toward her mouth. "Giant?" "Yes," Lorenzo said, nodding gravely. "He's a friend of mine. He lives up in the clouds, and his bowling alley is right over this town. He's not very good. He keeps dropping the ball. That's the sound you hear. A strike. He's clumsy." A tiny smile flickered on Maya's lips. "He's bowling." "He is, and he's probably very embarrassed you hurt him. He's a little shy." "Wow," Maya breathed. He then looked over at the other bed. Lily had peeked out from her pillow. He didn't smile. He just held her gaze. "You should tell your sister he's clumsy," he said to Maya, "so she's not scared." Ava was frozen, watching him, this man, this mob king, this cold, hard, intimidating force of nature was holding her niece's tiny hand, which he had plucked from her mouth. He was talking about bowling giants. His voice, which she had only heard in flat commands or quiet confessions, was impossibly gentle. It was a warmth that was so at odds with his cold persona that it made her head spin. He stayed there until the thunder softened to a distant rumble, his presence a strange, solid anchor in the room. The girl's breathing evened out. Maya fell asleep first, her small hand still loosely enclosed in his. He gently extracted it and tucked the blanket around her chin. He and Ava crept back into the living room. They sat on the lumpy, worn-out couch, a foot of space between them. The storm raged outside, but in here, there was only the sound of the rain and the hum of the refrigerator. Ava pulled a quilt off the back of the couch, her hands shaking. "Thank you," she said, "for that. With them. I didn't know how to—" "It's nothing," he said. They sat in silence for a long time. The tension was different now. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something heavy and electric. "You're not as terrible as you pretend to be," Ava whispered, looking at her hands. He turned his head to look at her. The lamplight caught the exhaustion on her face, the smudge of flour on her cheek. "And you," he said, his voice soft, "are not as rude as you pretend to be." He lifted his hand. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He didn't reach for her body. He reached for her face. He hesitated, his fingers hovering an inch from her skin. A silent question. Ava's breath caught. She'd been touched by debt collectors, by rude customers, by weeping children. She'd not been touched, not with gentleness, in years. She leaned forward 1 inch, closing the distance. She leaned into his touch. His thumb, calloused and rough, brushed against her cheekbone. It was the softest thing she had ever felt. It sent a tremor through her entire body. Her eyes fluttered closed. That was all the invitation he needed. He leaned in, and his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of hunger. It was not a kiss of passion, not the way the world defined it. It was a kiss of profound, unutterable loneliness. It was slow. It was exploratory. It was a question. "Are you as broken as I am?" And the answer, in the soft press of her lips, was yes. It was an emotional release, a dam breaking for two people who had held themselves together with sheer force of will. She tasted coffee and the faint, sweet trace of the apple juice she'd been drinking. He tasted of the night, of the rain, of a strength she had never known. She gripped the front of his expensive shirt, her knuckles white, anchoring herself to him. He deepened the kiss, just slightly, his other hand moving to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her messy hair. He held her as if she were made of glass, not iron. When he pulled back, they were both breathing heavily. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes were dark, intense, and she could see a reflection of her own stunned, fragile self in them. "Ava," he breathed. The word was a prayer. It was his voice that broke the spell. She pulled back, her hands flying to her mouth. This was insane. This was a man from a world that would destroy her. The girls were in the next room. Her sister was in the hospital. "I can't," she whispered, her voice choking. "I can't." Lorenzo looked at her, at the panic in her eyes, and he did the most surprising thing of all. He nodded. He didn't push. He didn't argue. He didn't try to charm or command her. "Okay," he said. He stood up, walking to the window. The storm was, if anything, worse. "You should stay," she said, her voice trembling. "On the couch. I mean, you can't drive. It's not safe." He turned back to her. "Ava." Just to sleep," she said, mortified. "The storm, that's all." He nodded again. She retrieved a pillow and the one blanket that didn't have a cartoon character on it. She tossed them on the couch. He began to unbutton his shirt. "What are you doing?" she yelped. He paused, one button undone. "I'm not sleeping in a $2,000 suit." "Oh, right." He took off his suit jacket, folded it meticulously, and laid it over a chair. He took off his tie. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. He was still in his undershirt and trousers, but he looked different, more real, more dangerous in a way. He sat on the couch. She hovered, unsure. "Go to bed, Ava," he said, his voice gentle. "I can't. I'll just—" She sat on the far end of the couch, pulling the quilt over her legs. "I'll just rest my eyes." They slept like that, clothed, on opposite ends of the lumpy sofa, sometime in the night. She must have turned, and he must have moved, because when she woke, the sun was streaming in, and she was lying down, her feet near his hips, a shared blanket between them. They hadn't touched, but an intimacy had passed between them in the dark, a silent truce. Ava woke up first, and panic, cold and sharp, cut through the hazy warmth of sleep. A mafia boss, a killer, a man of violence. He was on her couch. She had kissed him. She had led him near her children. She scrambled up, her heart hammering. He woke instantly, all traces of sleep gone. He didn't sit up slowly. He was just awake. He saw her face. The softness from the night before was gone, replaced by the familiar, brittle wall of her fear. "Ava, you should go," she said, her voice harsh. She stood, clutching the blanket to her chest like a shield. "The storm is over." Lorenzo stood up. He was all business again, the warmth from the night with the girls, the tenderness of the kiss, all erased. He was the man in the suit. "Last night," he began. "Last night was a mistake," she cut in, her voice sharp. "It was raining. I was tired. It won't happen again. I don't need whatever this is. I don't need your protection. I don't need anything from you." He watched her for a long, cold moment. He could have forced it. He could have argued. He could have reminded her of the kiss, of the way she had leaned into him. But he saw the terror in her eyes, and he knew it wasn't about him. Not really. It was about attachment. It was the terror of having one more thing to lose. So he just nodded. "I see." He put on his jacket. He straightened his tie. He was the mob king once more. He walked to the door, then paused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, black business card. "You're wrong," he said. "You do need something from me." He placed it on the counter with her keys. "I told you, I don't want your money," she spat. "It's not money. It's my private number, the one that doesn't go through a secretary. When you're in real trouble, the kind you can't handle with a sharp tongue, you call this number." She stared at the card. "I won't force myself on you, Ava," he said. "But take the number. He let himself out, the click of the locks behind him sounding unnervingly final. He got in his car, the sunlight bouncing off the clean, rain-washed streets. He picked up his phone. "Nico," he said. "The woman, Ava Monroe, her street. I want 2 men, invisible, 24/7, they don't engage, they just watch. I want to know about every person who isn't her or those children who get within 20 feet of that building. Is that clear?" He hung up. He would not let her be caught in this crossfire, whether she wanted his help or not. Later that week, Ava went to the hospital for her usual visit. She was exhausted, her mind a tangled mess of Lorenzo, the kiss, and her own crushing guilt. She was walking toward Sarah's room when Dr. Evans, the head neurologist, stopped her. "Ava, good, I was hoping to catch you." Her heart plummeted. "What is it? Did something happen?" The doctor, usually a man of grim professionalism, was smiling, a small, cautious smile. "We saw something this morning. During her routine assessment, there was a change." "A change?" "We tested her pupillary light reflex. For 3 years, there has been nothing. Today there was a response, a consistent bilateral response. It's a very slight improvement, Ava. I don't want you to get your hopes up too high. But it is the first positive change we have seen since her admission." Ava stared at him. She heard the words, but they didn't make sense. A response, a change. She walked into Sarah's room in a daze. She sat in the chair. She looked at her sister. And the hope, the thing she had been too terrified to feel for 3 years, broke through. It was more painful than the despair. She grabbed her sister's hand and, for the first time, she didn't just cry. She sobbed, her entire body shaking with a relief so profound it felt like grief. Across the street, parked in his sedan, Lorenzo watched. He had been there every day, just for a few minutes. He saw her go in, agitated. He waited. An hour later, he saw her come out. She didn't walk home. She leaned against the brick wall, the same spot as before, and he saw her shoulders shaking. He saw her hands cover her face. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, fighting every instinct to go to her. She has to call, he told himself. She has to be the one. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. When Ava got home that night, she was emotionally drained, empty, but with a tiny, flickering light in her chest. She put her key in the lock. It was already unlocked. She froze. She hadn't left it unlocked. She never left it unlocked. She pushed the door open. "Lily, Maya?" Silence. The babysitter, Mrs. Petrov, was already gone. The apartment was quiet, but the air was cold. She walked in, her heart hammering. The kitchen window, the one above the sink that was always stuck, was open. Someone had been here. She ran to her bedroom, expecting she didn't know what. But nothing was gone. Her laptop was there. The small tin of emergency money was still in the freezer. The cheap jewelry on her dresser was untouched. It wasn't a robbery. She walked back into the living room, her eyes scanning everything. And then she saw it. On the small mantel, there was a collection of photos. One, her favorite, was in the center. It was a picture of her and Sarah taken 5 years ago at a county fair. Lily and Maya on their shoulders. They were all laughing, the sun shining. It was the last picture of them all, whole. The picture was no longer in the center. It had been moved to the very edge of the mantel, and it had been turned, deliberately, to face the wall. It wasn't a robbery, it was a warning. Her blood ran cold. "We were here. We see you. We know what you love." Her pride, her stubbornness, her insistence on doing it all alone, it all evaporated, replaced by a pure, sickening terror. Not for herself, for the girls, for Sarah. Her hands shook so violently she could barely stand. She ran to the counter, to the small, black business card she had sworn she would never touch. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers barely able to dial the numbers. The phone rang only once before he answered, his voice devoid of warmth. A sharp, cold blade. "Yes." "It's Ava," she stammered, her hand gripping the receiver so tightly her knuckles were white. "The picture. Someone. Where are you?" "My apartment. I just got home. They turned the picture to the wall." The line was silent for 1, 2, 3 beats. She thought he had hung up. Then, Go to the kitchen, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. I'll be there in 3 minutes. The line went dead. 3 minutes. He was in Graywood. How? She ran to the kitchen, her back pressing against the flimsy door, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She had never known terror like this. It was cold, and it was total. A lifetime later. Exactly 3 minutes. She heard a sound not at her door, but in the hallway, then a single, sharp, authoritative knock. "Ava, open the door." She fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the knob. He was there in an instant. Not alone. Sal, the mountain of a man who drove his car, was behind him. Lorenzo pushed past her, his eyes dark, sweeping every corner of the small apartment. He was not angry, not in the way she'd seen him. This was something else. This was a cold, controlled, terrifying fury. He went straight to the mantel, his gaze falling on the turned photograph. He looked at it for a long second, his jaw working. Then he turned to her. "When did you find this?" Just now. I came home from the hospital. The doctor said he told Sarah she couldn't form the words. The good news from the hospital was a distant, forgotten dream. "You were at the hospital," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You didn't call me." "What? No, I didn't need— You didn't call me," he repeated, and the fury was for her. Now. "Someone is sending you a message, a threat against your family, and you waited. You walked home alone. You stood in this apartment, unsecured, for 10 minutes before you called." "I didn't know what to do," she cried, the tears finally breaking. "You call me. That's what you do." He ran a hand over his face, the mask of control settling again. "Sal, check the roof, the fire escapes. I want to know how they got in." Sal nodded and vanished. Lorenzo turned back to Ava. He was all business. "Pack a bag. For you and the girls. Close for a few days." "What? I can't. The girls have school tomorrow. I have my shift." "You don't have a shift," he said, his voice final. "And you don't have a school. You have a target on your back. You, your sister, and her children. Now, pack." The command in his voice was absolute, her pride, her stubborn independence. It felt like a paper shield against a hurricane. She went to the girls' room, her legs trembling, and began pulling clothes from their small dresser. "What do I tell them?" she whispered when he appeared in the doorway, his large frame filling the small, pink space. "You tell them we're going on a vacation," he said, his voice softening just a fraction as he looked at the small beds. "A surprise trip to a cabin in the woods. They'll like that," she argued, but it was half-hearted. She argued as she packed. She argued as he escorted her down the stairs to his car, and she argued as they drove out of Graywood, leaving the small, dark town behind. But she was arguing for the sake of arguing, because the alternative was to admit that she was completely, hopelessly out of her depth, and that this man, this mob king, was the only thing standing between her family and the shadows. He took them to a place deep in the woods, hours from Graywood. The cabin was not a cabin. It was a modern, beautiful house of glass and dark wood, perched on the edge of a silent, black lake. It was isolated. It was secure. Sal and another man, one she didn't recognize, took up positions outside. They were invisible, melting into the trees. The girls, woken from their beds, were ecstatic. "Are we on an adventure, Ava?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. "Is this Mr. Lorenzo's house? It's a safe place." "Baby," Ava said, her voice tight. For 2 days, they lived in a strange, suspended reality. The girls swam in the lake, their laughter echoing in the unnaturally quiet woods. Ava tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She tried to cook, to fill the sterile, state-of-the-art kitchen with the smell of pancakes. Lorenzo was a constant, unnerving presence. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a low, angry murmur as he paced the deck. But when he was with the girls, he was a different person. He was the man from her apartment, the man who told stories about bowling giants. On the second night, she found him helping Maya bait a fishing hook, his large, scarred hands infinitely gentle as he showed her how to hold the worm. Ava's chest ached. That evening, the tension that had been brewing between them, a thick, unspoken thing, finally broke. The girls were asleep, The men outside were silent sentinels. The house was quiet, lit only by a single lamp and the moonlight on the lake. Ava was washing dishes, her hands scrubbing at a pan with a violence that did nothing to ease the knot in her shoulders. Lorenzo was standing by the fireplace, watching her. "This is your fault, isn't it?" she said, her back to him. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes." "Who are they?" "The man who harassed you in the alley worked for a rival. His name is Marco Calderone. I warned him to stay away from you. He took it as a challenge. He sees you. He sees you as a way to get to me, as leverage." "Leverage," she repeated, the word tasting like poison. She slammed the pan down. "A weakness. That's what I am. That's what you made me." He crossed the room in 2 strides. He was behind her, his voice a low vibration she felt in her spine. "You're not weak, Ava. You're the strongest person I have ever met, but you are in my world now, and I will not let him use you." "And what about my sister?" she whispered, turning to face him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "My nieces. They're leverage too. You put them in danger. This safe house is a cage." "This is protection," he said, his voice raw. "I don't want your protection," she cried. "I want my life back. I want to not be scared all the time." The tears came then. The ones she had held back in the hospital, in the apartment, in the car, the dam of her pride, her fear, her exhaustion, it just broke. She didn't just cry. She unraveled, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. She expected him to be cold, to be impatient. Instead, his hands came up, cupping her face, his thumbs wiping at the tears with a rough gentleness that undid her completely. "I know," he whispered. "I know." She leaned into his touch, her hands coming up to grip his forearms. "I'm so tired," she breathed. "I know," he said again. His gaze dropped to her mouth. She saw it, the flicker of darkness, of a hunger that had nothing to do with comfort. She should have pulled away. She should have run, but she was so tired of running. His lips were not a question this time, but an answer. The kiss was not the slow, exploratory touch from her couch. This was desperate. It was a claim. It was a release of every ounce of fear and tension they had both carried for weeks. His mouth was hard and demanding, and she met him with a ferocity that stunned them both. She was not a victim being saved. She was a survivor, and she was drowning, and he was the only heir. She gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, her body pressing against his. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his arms wrapped around her, one hand tangling in her hair, the other sliding down her back to press her hips against his. He was steel and heat, and she had never felt anything so solid. It was a release of every unspoken thing, the fear, the loss, the loneliness, the pain of his sister, the pain of hers. They were 2 broken people, and they were healing each other in the only way they knew how. "Lorenzo," she breathed, the name a plea. He raised her as if she weighed nothing, setting her on the kitchen counter. He was between her legs, his body a warm, solid wall. He kissed her neck, her jaw, his lips trailing fire. "You are not a weakness, Ava," he murmured against her skin. "You are everything." This was not a gentle unfolding. It was a passionate, almost violent, shedding of armor. When he finally lifted her from the counter and carried her into the bedroom, it was not an act of seduction, but of necessity. He laid her on the bed, and for a moment, he just looked at her, his dark eyes burning with an emotion she was too raw to name. He was slow, then, his hands learning her, his mouth finding all the places she had hidden her pain. He was unmaking her and remaking her, all at once. And when they finally came together, it was not just a joining of bodies. It was a silent vow. It was a desperate, primal, beautiful thing. It was the first full breath either of them had taken in years. The next morning, Ava woke up, tangled in his arms. The sun was streaming through the windows, and for the first time in her life, she felt safe, truly safe. He was already awake, watching her, his face clear of the shadows that usually haunted it. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his hard features. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough. She was about to answer when the sharp electronic ring of his satellite phone on the nightstand shattered the peace. He sighed, the smile vanishing, and grabbed it. What? His face changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the boss. Where? How did they find him? Damn it. And... He went still. He looked over at her, his eyes unreadable. And they asked about the woman Manti, he said, his voice flat. I understand. Find out who talked. I'll handle it from here. He hung up, placing the phone down with a precise, deliberate. What is it? Ava asked, sitting up, clutching the sheet to her chest. That was Nico, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. One of my lieutenants. He was captured last night in New Harbor. They were looking for information. Information? About me. He stood up, turning his back to her, and walked to the window. And about you. Ava's blood ran cold. Me? They tortured him, Lorenzo said, his voice a low, dangerous thing. They asked him where I was hiding, and they asked him where he could find the waitress from Greywood. Ava felt the bile rise in her throat. She was not a complication. She was not leveraged. She was a target. Lily, Maya, Sarah, because of him. Because of this? It's my fault, she whispered. The guilt, a suffocating wave. He was tortured because of me. I'm a weakness. I'm getting you all killed. Ava, don't... He turned to her, his face a mask of stone. This is not your fault. This is Calderon. This is my war. But I'm the one he's using. She spent the rest of the day in a fog, her mind replaying the phone call. Lorenzo was busy, on the phone, his men in a state of high alert. He was distracted. He was vulnerable. And it was because of her. Her old instincts, the ones that told her to carry everything alone, screamed at her. She had to protect him. She had to protect her girls. And the only way to do that was to disappear. If she was gone, if she was no longer his weakness, he could fight his war. That night, she waited. She lay in bed, pretending to be asleep, her breathing even, her body still. Lorenzo sat in a chair by the window, the moonlight painting him in silver and shadow. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Around 3 a.m, his head finally dipped, his breathing deepening. Now. She slid from the bed, a ghost in the darkness. She pulled on her jeans and a sweater, her sneakers in her hand. She didn't need a bag. She just needed to be gone. She would take the girls. She would go somewhere. Anywhere. She crept into the living room, her heart hammering in her chest. She made it to the front door. Her hand was on the doorknob. Where do you think you're going? His voice, cold and quiet, cut through the darkness. She spun around. He was there, not 10 feet away, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold, unadulterated rage. She stammered. I needed air. Don't lie to me, he snarled. Not now. He was on her in an instant, his hand slamming against the door above her head, trapping her. He wasn't gentle. He was furious. He was terrified. You were leaving, he accused, his voice a low growl. You were going to run. After everything. You were going to take the girls and run. I have to, she cried, her own fear and guilt erupting. Don't you see? They're hunting me. That man was tortured because of me. You're a target because of me. If I'm gone, he'll leave you alone. You think that's how this works, he yelled, his control finally, completely snapping. He gripped her arms, pinning her against the wall. You think you can just leave. You think your disappearing will make this stop. It will only make it worse. He will hunt you, and I will tear the world apart to find you. He was shaking her, his eyes wild. You don't get to decide who I care about. The words, shouted in the dark, hung in the air. Care. Ava's fight dissolved. The terror that had been strangling her for days finally broke free. I'm scared, she whispered, the tears streaming down her face. I'm so scared. Not for me, for them, for you. I don't know how to live like this. I don't know how to be the person who gets other people hurt. The fury drained from his face, replaced by a deep, aching pain. His grip on her arms softened, his hands sliding up to cup her face, his forehead resting against hers. He held her, his large body shielding her, his own breathing ragged. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice thick. "You're not alone, not anymore. I've got you." He held her as she cried, her sobs muffled against his chest. "You're not just some rude woman anymore," he murmured, his lips against her hair. She held on to him, her knuckles white. She was safe. But as they stood there, locked in an embrace of desperation and confession, a man on the perimeter of the property, a man Lorenzo had trusted with his life, checked his phone. A new message had come through. "They're together. He's not letting her go." The man typed a quick reply. "He's compromised. The package is secure. Location is confirmed. We move at dawn." The cold light of dawn at the cabin felt like an accusation. The peace of the night, of Ava's confession, of his arms around her, was shattered. Lorenzo hadn't slept. He had watched her, and he had listened to the sounds of his own security detail, one of whom was a traitor. The message had come through Nico's network just before sunrise. The man captured, Antonio, was loyal. But one of the perimeter guards at the cabin, a man named Vesto, had missed his check-in. His tracking signal had gone offline for 2 minutes, just long enough to send a message. The betrayal was confirmed. Lorenzo was now a man operating behind enemy lines, in his own house. "We're leaving," he said, his voice flat. He was dressed, his face a mask of cold fury. Ava sat up, clutching the sheet. "Leaving? Where? What's going on?" "Vesto, one of my men is here. He's a traitor." He didn't waste time softening it. "He just confirmed your location. He told them I'm compromised. He told them you're here. We have to move. Now." "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice shaking as she pulled on her jeans. "Back to Graywood," he said. She froze. "What? That's insane. That's the first place they'll look." "Exactly," Lorenzo said, checking the clip on his pistol. "Marco thinks I'm weak, that I'm running, that you compromise me. He's right about one thing. He's using you as the target. So, we stopped letting him hunt. We set the trap, and I will be the one using you as bait." "No," Ava said. The word was quiet, but it stopped him cold. "This isn't a discussion, Ava." "No," she said again, standing up, her eyes blazing with a new, terrifying clarity. "I am not bait. I am not a pawn. You move across a board. I am not a package your men talk about. I'm the reason this is happening. You told me that. I'm the leverage. Well, leverage works both ways." He stared at her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "You think hiding me worked?" she pressed on, her voice gaining strength. "Your man was tortured. They know about me. Hiding me just makes me a prize. You want to end this? Stop hiding me. You want to set a trap? Let me be the one holding the goddamn snare. I'm involved. I'm not running. I'm not sitting in a car. I'm fighting back." For a long moment, he just looked at her. He saw the waitress who had thrown his money back in his face. He saw the woman who had cried in his arms. And he saw, for the first time, a woman who looked at the fire and wasn't afraid to step into it. "He will try to kill you. Ava. He's already trying," she shot back. "At least this way. I see it coming." A slow, cold smile touched his lips. It was a terrifying, proud expression. "Get dressed. We went back to Graywood. We leaked that I'm cutting you loose, that I'm meeting Marco to negotiate a truce, that I'm giving you to him in exchange for peace. He'll believe that? He'll believe I'm a coward who got cold feet," Lorenzo said. "He'll believe I'm pathetic, and his pride will make him come." The drive back to Graywood was the antithesis of their previous trips. They were in a black armored SUV, Sal at the wheel, Nico in the passenger seat. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Lorenzo sat in the back with Ava, his focus absolute. He wasn't the man who had held her. He was the boss, the general, and this was war. They didn't go to her apartment. They went to the industrial outskirts of town, to an abandoned cannery that his family had owned on paper for 50 years. It smelled of rust, damp, and decay. The plan was set. Nico had fed the false information through a channel they knew Marco monitored. The meet was set for that night. "Here, a negotiation. You stay outside," Lorenzo said to Ava. His voice was hard, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "You stay with Nico. Sal and I go in. When Marco arrives, you do not move. You do not make a sound. Nico's only job is to keep you alive and get you out. Whatever you hear, you stay. That is the only way this works." Ava's heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She nodded. "I understand." Night fell, and with it came a cold, driving rain. The cannery was a black silhouette against a bruised sky. Ava sat in the back of the SUV with Nico, parked 300 yards away, hidden in a thicket of overgrown trees. Sal and Lorenzo had been inside for an hour, securing the building. "He's here," Nico said, his voice flat. He was watching a set of headlights turn off the main road. A black sedan, followed by two more, pulled up to the cannery. Marco Calderone stepped out, flanked by 6 men. They looked casual, arrogant. They thought they were coming to a surrender. "Now," Nico murmured. "We wait." Ava's hands were clenched so tightly her fingernails bit into her palms. She was nervous, but the terror from the cabin was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She watched as, 2 minutes later, another set of cars approached, these from the opposite direction, their lights off. They weren't Marco's. They were a separate crew. "Nico," she whispered, her voice tight. "Who are they?" Nico's face was grim. "They're not ours." The new men, a dozen of them, were fanning out, creating a second, wider perimeter, effectively trapping everyone, including Marco, inside. "He was double-crossed," Nico said, his hand moving to his weapon. "His own men, they're cleaning the house." Inside the cannery, Lorenzo stood on a rusted catwalk, looking down at Marco, who was preening in the center of the vast, empty floor. "Lorenzo," Marco called out, his voice echoing. "I'm touched. You came. Are you ready to beg? To give me what's mine? I hear you're discarding your little problem." "I came," Lorenzo said, and in his voice a low, cold projector. "To see your face. You broke the rules, Marco. You targeted a civilian. You put your hands on what was mine." "Yours," Marco laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You fell for a waitress? Pathetic." "You, the great Lorenzo DeSantis, brought down by nobody. She made you weak." "No," Lorenzo said, stepping into a pool of faint moonlight from a broken skylight. "She made me realize what was important. You're just sloppy." As if on cue, Marco's own men, the ones who had entered with him, raised their weapons and pointed them at Marco. Marco's smile evaporated. "What is this?" "It's a takeover." "Old man," one of them snarled. "The same way you were planning to take over DeSantis. You're both dinosaurs, and you brought your own insurance." A side door opened, and another man dragged in a small, crying girl, no older than 10, her hands bound. Marco's face went white with a terror that was not for himself. "Angelina? No, God, no, that's my niece. What are you doing?" "You're weak," the man said. "You let a waitress stop you. We're just cleaning the house, starting with your family." Then the man raised his gun to point at the girl. Outside, Ava heard the first shot. It wasn't a volley. It was a single, deafening crack. "Nico, what was that?" Nico was already out of the car. "Stay here. Ava, that's an order," he and Sal, who had materialized from the shadows, were running toward the building. Weapons drawn. Ava waited. 1 second, 2, then the world exploded. A sustained volley of automatic gunfire erupted from the cannery. Shouts, screams, the sound of metal tearing. She thought of Lorenzo, wounded, alone. Against orders, she grabbed the door handle. She remembered the weight of the pistol Nico had pressed into her hand 20 minutes earlier. "You won't need this," he'd said, his eyes hard. "But he's teaching me not to be unprepared." It was cold in her jacket pocket. She ran. She burst through the side door, the one Sal and Nico had used. The scene inside was chaotic. It was a 3-way firefight, Lorenzo's men, Marco's traitors, and the new, unidentified crew were all engaged. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cordite. She saw Nico and Sal, pinned down behind a stack of rusted barrels, providing cover fire. But where was Lorenzo? She scanned the dark, vast space, her heart hammering. A bullet whined past her head, and she dropped, scrambling behind a rusted conveyor belt. Then she saw him. He was across the floor, near the catwalk, partially in the shadows. He was on one knee, and he was not alone. He was shielding the small, crying girl, Marco's niece, with his own body, his back to the firefight. He was bleeding. A dark, spreading stain was soaking his side. His hand pressed against it. One of the unknown gunmen saw them. He was taking aim, a clear shot at Lorenzo's exposed back. "No!" Ava screamed. She ran, a desperate zigzagging sprint. Lorenzo looked up, and his eyes wide, a mask of fury and pain. "Ava, get out!" "Shut up!" she sobbed. Sliding on the slick concrete to his side, she grabbed his arm. "We're going." "The girl," he gritted, pushing the terrified child toward her. "Get her out." "That's all that matters." "We all go," Ava said, her voice a steel rod. She looped his arm over her shoulder, hauling him up. He roared in pain but used the momentum to stand, his other arm scooping up the girl. They were a broken, stumbling trio, moving toward the side door. "Get to the car," Nico yelled, seeing them, his face a mask of relief and terror. He and Sal laid down a spray of cover fire. They burst out of the cannery, into the cold, cleansing rain. They were halfway across the open lot. The SUV was in sight. A man, one of Marco's, his face twisted in a snarl, stepped out from behind an abandoned truck. He raised his pistol, aiming it directly at Lorenzo's back. There was no time to think, no time to be scared. Ava shoved Lorenzo and the girl forward, pushing them out of the line of fire. She ripped the small pistol from her pocket. Her hands were shaking, but her gaze was steady. She raised it, both hands, just as he had taught her on the drive, and she pulled the trigger. One shot, two. The sound was deafening, flat in the open air. The man stared, his eyes wide in disbelief. Before he crumpled to the ground, Ava stared at him, at the gun in her hand. It was smoking. She had done it. The world went silent. The gunfire from inside the cannery had stopped. Sal had the girl, pulling her into the back of the SUV. Nico was securing the perimeter. Lorenzo turned, his face pale, his eyes fixed on Ava. He saw the gun. He saw the man on the ground. He saw her, shaking, her face a mask of shock. Soaked in the rain, he took one step toward her, his hand outstretched. "Ava!" Then the adrenaline that had held him together, the sheer force of his will, finally gave out. His legs buckled. He didn't fall. He collapsed, a dead weight, onto the wet, cracked asphalt. "Lorenzo!" Her scream ripped through the night. She dropped the gun, scrambling to him, falling to her knees in the mud and rain. She pulled his head into her lap, her hands slick with his blood. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No, no, no." She pressed her hands to the wound in his side, a desperate, useless attempt to hold him together. "Lorenzo, stay with me. You stay with me. You hear?" He looked up at her, his eyes unfocused, his breath a shallow rattle. "Ava," he breathed. "You're safe. Please don't die," she sobbed, her tears mixing with the rain, washing the blood from her hands. "Please, I can't. Please don't die." His eyes fluttered and closed. The first thing he was aware of was the beeping. Steady, annoying. The second was the smell. Not rust and rain, antiseptic. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was white. The light was soft. He was in the hospital. Not Graywood. This was clean. Private, his own. He was alive. He turned his head, a wince of pain shooting through his side. His hand felt heavy. It wasn't free. She was there. Ava was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head down on the mattress, her cheek resting on their joined hands. Her hair was still damp, matted. Her face was pale, streaked with grime and dried tears. She looked exhausted, broken, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She was here. She hadn't run. She was holding his hand. He felt a weak, slow pressure. He tightened his fingers around hers. She was real. He closed his eyes, letting the steady beeping of the monitor and the warmth of her hand pull him back into a darkness that, for the first time in his life, was not cold and was not empty. Lorenzo's recovery was slow, and for him, infuriating. He was a man of action, and he was now confined to a bed, his body a map of stitches and bruised ribs, but the physical pain was a dull, distant throb compared to the strange, sharp clarity in his mind. Ava never left his side. For the first 2 days, She was a silent, exhausted shadow in the chair, her hand either holding him or resting on the bed rail, as if to prove he was still there. Nico and Sal handled the outside world. The traitors, including Vesto, had been dealt with. Marco Calderone had, in the chaos, escaped, but he was a broken man, his organization shattered by his own internal coup. The war, for now, was over. On the third day, Lorenzo was sitting up in bed, a tray of untouched food in front of him. Ava was by the window, staring out at the New Harbor skyline, a view so different from the flat, damp fields of Graywood. "You're quiet," he said, his voice still rough. She turned. She looked, in the harsh afternoon light, like a ghost. "They moved Sarah," she said, her voice small. "I know. They brought her here, to this hospital, your hospital. It's the best care. Ava, she's stable. The trip was managed." She walked to the foot of his bed, her hands twisting. "This isn't my world. Lorenzo, these rooms, the men in black suits in the hallway, the way the nurses look at me, like I'm some, I don't know what I am." He saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear she'd had in the cabin, the fear of a world she didn't understand. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "Stay here. With me. You don't have to go back. The girls, I can have brought them here. I'll get a place, a house. Away from all of this. Secure." She shook her head, a small, violent motion. "No, I can't." "You can't?" he asked, his patience thin from the pain, starting to fray. "Or you won't. I don't belong here," she said, her voice rising. "I'm the waitress from the diner, remember? The rude, insufferable woman. This is a fantasy, a dangerous one. I have a life. I have to get back to my life." She was lying. He knew it, and she knew he knew it. But the armor was back up, the walls she had built so carefully, and even he, for all his strength, couldn't seem to find a way past them. "Ava, I have to go. Lorenzo, I need to check on my apartment. The girl's missus. Petrov, the babysitter, I have to pay her. I have to go home." She was making excuses, but he was weak, and she was terrified. He knew that pushing her now would only make her run faster. "Fine," he said, his voice flat. "Nico will arrange a car for you, but you are not to go alone. I don't need... It's not a request. Ava." He cut her off, his voice the cold steel of the boss. "It's a condition, or you don't go. You are still a target." She left 2 hours later. He watched her from his window as she got into the black sedan, her small, thin frame looking utterly lost as Sal held the door for her. He felt a cold dread in his gut, a feeling he hadn't had even in the cannery. He was losing her. The drive to Graywood was 3 hours of silent torture for Ava. She was running. She had saved his life, and she had held him as he bled. In doing so, she had attached herself to him in a way that terrified her more than any bullet. She had let him see her, all of her. When the sedan pulled up to her street, she was almost sick with relief. "You can wait here," she told the driver. "Mister, DeSantis's orders were to see you inside," the man said, his voice polite but firm. She walked into her building, her old, familiar life, but something was wrong. The air was wrong. When she got to her apartment, she saw why. The door was ajar, the wood around the lock splintered and broken. "No," she whispered. She pushed it open. The apartment was a ruin. It wasn't a robbery, it was a violation. The couch had been slashed, the cushions torn apart. The girl's drawings had been ripped from the fridge, the pink, childish scrawls torn to pieces on the floor. In the kitchen, her few dishes were shattered, but the worst was the wall. Someone had used a can of red spray paint in large, dripping letters. It said, "Mafia whore." She stood there, frozen, the world tilting. This was her home, her safe place. She ran, stumbling out of the apartment, down the stairs, her breath catching in her throat. She had to get to the diner, to Gus, to something familiar. She ran the 6 blocks to the Copper Bell, but when she turned the corner, she stopped dead. The diner was gone. The windows were boarded up, the front was covered in the same sick, red spray paint. The sign was smashed, a closed sign. A permanent, official-looking one from the bank was nailed to the door. Vandalism, foreclosure. It didn't matter. It was over. She had nowhere to go. She had no job. She had no home. The life she'd been so desperate to run back to it didn't exist anymore. The black sedan had followed her. Slowly. It pulled up to the curb. She just stood there, staring at the wreckage of her life, the tears she had refused to shed for weeks, finally, silently, tracking down her face. The back door of the sedan opened. Not a driver, it was Lorenzo. He wasn't in a hospital gown, he was in a suit, his face pale and drawn, his side clearly aching. But he was there. He must have left the hospital the second she had. He walked toward her, his limp pronounced. His face was a mask of cold, hard fury. "When were you going to tell me?" he asked. "I just found out," she whispered. "No," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The apartment, the diner. When were you going to tell me you had nowhere to go? Were you just going to what? Disappear, sleep on the street, find another diner?" I don't know." "Why do you always try to carry everything alone?" he exploded, his voice echoing in the empty street. "Why? After everything, after the cabin, after the cannery, you still think you're alone? You still think I would let this happen?" The anger in his voice. It wasn't for her. It was for the world that had done this to her. It was the righteous fury of a man who had seen his world protected, and hers destroyed. And she finally broke. "Because I'm scared," she screamed, her voice cracking, her fists balled at her sides. "I'm scared, Lorenzo, okay? I'm terrified." "You're terrified of them? I dealt with them. They're gone." "No," she sobbed, the words tearing out of her. "Not of them, of you. I'm terrified of this, of depending on you. I'm terrified that I'll get used to it. I'll get used to the safety and the warmth and not being scared all the time. And then you'll leave." She was pacing, unseeing, the words a torrent. "My father left. He walked out for cigarettes and never came back. My mother just disappeared, and she left us. And then Sarah was left. And I'm the one who stays. I'm the one who cleans up the mess. That's my job." She stopped, looking at him, her eyes wide with a pain that was older than him. Older than any of this. "I can't be the one who gets left. Lorenzo, I can't. It will kill me. And I'd rather have nothing than have all of this, and then lose it. I'd rather be alone." He just stared at her. His hard, dark eyes unblinking. The fury was gone, replaced by something deep and soft and aching. He closed the distance between them, his limp forgotten. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You're the strongest woman I know, Ava Monroe," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "You have carried a world that would have crushed any other person. But strength doesn't mean being alone. It doesn't mean you have to—" "Not anymore. I don't know how," she whispered, her voice broken. "Then I'll teach you," he said. "Get in the car." He didn't take her back to his estate. He didn't take her to a fancy house. He took her, of all places, back to the hospital in New Harbor. His hospital. "Lorenzo, I can't, not now, I'm a mess." "This is the last piece," he said, his voice gentle. He led her not to his room, but to the elevator. He inserted a key, and they went up. Past the main floors, past the penthouse suite, the elevator opened onto a floor that wasn't on the public directory. It wasn't a hospital floor. It was beautiful. It was quiet, filled with soft light, warm woods, and the most advanced medical technology he could buy. And in the center, in a large private room with a window that overlooked a private garden, was a single bed. Sarah. "What is this?" Ava breathed, her hand going to her mouth. "Doctor." Evans, the same neurologist from Graywood, walked out, a smile on his face. "Ava, welcome." "We were just getting her settled. I don't understand," she said, looking at Lorenzo. He took her hand, his grip solid and warm. "My sister, Eliana, was supposed to go to medical school," he said quietly. "After her death, my father funded a wing. After his death, I expanded it. This is the DeSantis Neurological Wing. It's the best in the country. It just wasn't public. Until now." He led her into the room. "The grant, the one that paid your bills, was me. The improvement she showed was real. But she needed more. She needed this. This is her new home. Lifelong care, the best physical therapy, the best experimental treatments, everything. It's all here. For her and for you. Ava walked to her sister's bed. Sarah looked peaceful. The harsh beeping was gone, replaced by a soft, quiet hum. Did you buy her a hospital floor? I own the hospital, he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I just renovated. You said you were terrified of being left, that you're the one who stays. Well, I'm the man who provides. You don't ever have to be scared for her again, Ava. You don't have to carry her. I'm carrying her. I'm carrying you. She turned to him, the tears in her eyes different now. They weren't from fear. They were released. No one has ever done anything like this. No one is me, he said, his voice soft. He touched her cheek. Let it go, Ava. It's over. You can let it go. And she did. She leaned into him, her head resting on his chest, and she let the weight of the last 3 years, the weight of her entire life, just fall away. That night, they were not in a hospital. He took her to his house, his real home, the penthouse above the city. They didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. He led her to his room, and he undressed her, slowly, as if she were a piece of art. His hands, which had known only violence and control, were now maps of worship, and she let him. She was not the desperate, frantic woman from the cabin. She was not the terrified, angry woman from the diner. She was just Ava. He made love to her, this time, with a reverence that was almost holy. It was slow. It was joyful. It was a promise. It was 2 hands, finally unclenching, and finding they fit perfectly together. It was the trust she had been so terrified to give, and the safety he had been so desperate to provide. She lay in his arms, the city lights twinkling below, and she was not afraid. I'll stay, she whispered into the darkness. He tensed. What? I'll stay, she said again, her voice clear, and for the first time, sure, not because of the hospital, not because I'm scared, or because I have nowhere to go. I'll stay with you, for the first time in my life. I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm just safe. He pulled her on top of him, his eyes boring into hers. You're sure? She smiled. A real, luminous smile. The one he had seen in the diner, the one that had captivated him. I've never been more sure of anything. 1 year later, the penthouse was full. Not with capos and soldiers, but with family. Nico was there, holding a very much awake Lily on his shoulders. Sal was teaching Maya how to tie a knot with a silk napkin, and Dr. Evans was in the corner, laughing. Ava was standing by the window, her hand resting on the glass, looking down at the city. She was wearing a simple, elegant green dress, her hair down. She was beautiful. Lorenzo came up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. You're nervous, he murmured. I'm not, she said, leaning back against him. I'm happy. It's an unfamiliar feeling. He kissed her neck. A toast, Nico called out, raising a glass. Lorenzo turned, his hand in hers, and faced the room. He raised his own glass. To my family, he said. He looked at Nico, at Sal, then his eyes landed on Ava. And to my fiancé, an old-world uncle, one of his father's cousins, chuckled. A fine choice. Lorenzo, a beauty. But why her? Why this one? After all this time, Lorenzo smiled. He looked at Ava, at the woman who had fought him, who had shot a man for him, who had cried in his arms, and who had, finally, let him in. He brought her hand to his lips. Because, he said, his voice clear and strong, for everyone to hear. I saw her concern when no one else did, and I'll never let her carry it alone again. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed it. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an episode. And finally, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite part of Lorenzo and Ava's journey? Let us know in English in the comments below.